What's up, guys? My mic input yesterday was about as fucked as my bets were. I apologize for that. I am an idiot. Had not selected the correct mic input. And yesterday's bets did not go that great, although a couple of them were bullshit, I would have to say. One on the Toronto Blue Jays, one on the under in the Pirates-Giants game, but then went 2 and 3. The Yankees-Brewers game, I mean, that was looking good until like the fourth inning. I think it was a 1-0 game, or maybe it was even scoreless, and then the floodgates just opened. Each starter, I think, gave up 4 runs, and then the bullpens gave it up. Very unfortunate. The Brewers bullpen especially was a nightmare. Horrible. And then, I mean, that's a loss that I'll like take. I'll be like, yeah, that was wrong. But the other two, I mean, you just have to be kidding me. The Milwaukee Bucks couldn't even cover a 10-point spread as an underdog when they won the paint battle. They were dominating in the paint. They were winning the paint battle by like 20 points for large stretches of that game throughout the second half. They won the paint battle by 10 in the end. I believe they had more field goal attempts, or maybe it was just very close to even with the amount of field goal attempts. They won the rebound battle. Like I said, won the paint battle, and those are the more consistent stats. So usually you look at that and you're like, oh, that team probably won the game outright. But no, in this case, they didn't even cover a double-digit spread because Indiana was like over 50% from three-point range. They hit, I don't even remember how many threes it was in total. I think it might have been over 20. It was somewhere in the 20 range. They had at least 10 more, maybe 11 more three-pointers. So they outscored Milwaukee by 30 or 33 points from beyond the arc. And it was still only whatever, like a 13-point victory or whatever. So the entire game hinged on a ridiculous three-point shooting performance from Indiana, which, sure, I mean, they're pretty good at doing that, but it's still like that was still a complete outlier situation. Teams don't just shoot over 50% from downtown like that and beat opponents that dominate them in the paint and beat them by more than double digits. I mean, that's just ridiculous. And then the Nashville Predators one was even worse. Nashville was winning the game 3-1 in the final 3 minutes of regulation in that game. They had the game wrapped up. It was over. And then it was like one of the worst playoff game collapses probably ever. They were up 3-1, like I said. Then they give up one goal. So it was still 3-2. And then it was still 3-2 into the final minute of regulation. And they gave up a tying goal in the final minute. So they gave up 2 goals in the final 3 minutes of regulation. And then they lost in overtime. And it was another game where I think they had outperformed Vancouver in the game. And they had like the better statistics in the game. They had the game basically completely wrapped up in the final minutes of regulation. That is just a horrific beat. And it's one of the worst that I've taken in a while now because I've been on like a hot streak. We'll move on to today. Today, I don't have anything in the NHL or NBA playoffs today, at least for now. Only 2 games in the NHL, and I'm not really that interested. We have Tampa at Florida. The series going back to Florida now because Tampa stayed alive. I had mentioned those teams that were teams that were in the 04 the 03 situation, trying to avoid the sweeps in those. Those teams tend to be like decent in hockey, more decent than they are in the NBA because it's more likely they're actually going to be able to come back. Washington was not able to do it, so congratulations to the New York Rangers. I believe the first team to advance from the first round of the playoffs. So the New York Rangers were able to win that series. They will be moving on. What the fuck is going on with my camera, dude? I hate this. Camera just wants to be blurry. It's such a waste of time trying to fix it, too. This is unbelievable. All right, there we go. You get to see my extremely handsome, unshaven face. Tampa, Florida. Tampa avoided getting swept now. So now it's 3-1 Florida. It's back in Florida. Florida up from minus 165 to minus 182. So the money line and the money's coming in on Florida. It looks like 81% of the tickets, 98% of the cash. I mean, the market indicators seem to be on Florida in this one. The question is basically, does winning that game finally and avoiding the sweep when you're down 3-0, does that like give you some momentum and propel you into the next game, give you a little bit of confidence because now, you actually finally won a game in the series? Or did it take so much out of you to try to win that game that you're going to fall flat in the next game and not have much left? That is kind of the question when you get into situations like this where a team just won when they were down 3-0. So I don't know, but the market indicators are on Florida on that one. And then Dallas, Vegas is the other one. I won on Dallas the other night. They were able to close this series to a 2-1 series now. Every game has been won by the road team so far in the series. Not sure that that's going to happen again here, though. Dallas, that's a big win for them because they finally got revenge on Vegas after Vegas eliminated them last year. Dallas had been looking for that revenge the whole time, failed to get it during the regular season this year. Dallas lost every game to Vegas this year, lost the first 2 games of this series, both at home, even though Dallas outplayed Vegas in the first game, and I lost a bet on that one. Dallas was, I thought, undervalued in that one. They were a much bigger favorite in the next game. The odds makers have been telling you Dallas is the better of these two teams the whole time. Vegas are the returning champs, but of course they are the wild card in the playoffs here, in this group in the playoffs, in this division of the playoffs this year. Dallas is up. They flipped from a plus 100 underdog here to a minus 108 favorite. It looks like favorite on the road, although that still is indicative that Vegas is actually probably about like minus 115 or whatever. So Vegas still like the very slight favorite in this one. Line similar to what it was in the last game. 60% of the tickets on Dallas, but it looks like 80% of the cash on the other side on Vegas. So it looks like the public is coming in on the Dallas side thinking, oh, now this is the Dallas team that we expected, because a lot of people were picking Dallas to win the Western Conference here. Now they finally won a game. Oh, now we're seeing, the Dallas team, we're seeing that they are who we thought they were. Oh, now they're just going to win again now. I don't know about that. I mean, it looks like the line has flipped in their direction, sure, but the market indicators otherwise. The percentages seem to be indicating otherwise, and seem to be indicating this is almost a pros versus Joes type of situation where the pros, the higher cash percentage is actually on Vegas at home. So I don't know what to think about that. Like, was that such a big win for Dallas finally getting over the hump? Like, it's a similar question to what I asked about Tampa Bay. Like, are they going to have that much left? Is that going to give them momentum, or are they going to fall flat because that was such a big win when they finally got revenge? Or do they not consider it to be revenge until they actually win a series against Vegas and get like total revenge, absolute revenge, and actually eliminate them after having been eliminated by them last year? Tough to decide, tough to gauge. NBA, we have 3 series, 3 games being played today. Congratulations to the Minnesota T-Wolves, by the way, who were the first team to advance from the first round of the NBA playoffs, I believe, in a sweep of Phoenix. Phoenix, really a bad performance from Phoenix throughout this playoff series. And Minnesota also played very good defense throughout the series. Phoenix, I mean, they weren't like a totally dead team last night. They played pretty competitively, but it just wasn't enough. They just weren't able to do it. Maybe they're a little bit too old. They're not deep enough, and they just succumbed to a more physical, like defensive Minnesota team. Minnesota was able to do it last night. Not in blowout fashion, of course. As I said, it was a pretty close game, but Minnesota was able to do it. And weird situation at the end of that game where Devin Booker intentionally fouled, I forget who it was. He intentionally fouled Conley, I think, on Minnesota. And it caused Conley to have to Conley was, I don't know, trying to kind of avoid getting touched by him a bit, or I mean, you don't want to avoid getting intentionally fouled. Let them intentionally foul you. You're going to go to the free throw. The free throw line. But I don't know. So Conley looked like he kind of like tried to avoid it a little bit and ran like out on the baseline and ran into his own coach. And it seems like Minnesota's coach, I forget what his name is already, Chris something. Chris Finch, I believe is his name. He suffered a knee injury, and it looks like he might have a torn ACL because his own player ran into him on that play. That's crazy. That is not something that you see every day. So just a weird situation at the very end of that game yesterday. Probably could have been avoided. I see some T-Wolves fans mad at Devin Booker for it. I don't really think it was his fault. I think it was just a bad set of circumstances. I mean, you're trying to intentionally foul. It wasn't like a hard foul or anything where he shoved Conley or anything like that. No, he kind of just went like this and like just barely touched him. And Conley kept like moving, trying to avoid him, and stumbled like out of bounds, basically on the I said the baseline, not the baseline, the sideline there, and then ran into his own coach. I don't know. Celtics Heat are the first game up. My Celtics. Let's go Celtics. Celtics are around where I think they should have been in the previous game. I thought they were being shortchanged in the previous game, which is why I took the Celtics in the prior game. They're sitting at 10.5 now in this one. They were only 8.5 when the line came out in the previous game, and I think it was undervaluing them a little bit just because of their bad performance in game 2. But of course, they showed up in game 3, played well, took the 2-1 series lead. In this game, they have 53% of the tickets and 71% of the cash. So it looks like the cash discrepancy is on the Celtics again. I obviously like it a lot less in this situation and with this number. Celtics now not coming off an embarrassing home loss. Now they're coming off a nice, easy 20-point win, which was even more of a blowout than that final score looked. It was more similar to game 1. And yeah, the Celtics were hitting a bunch of threes again like they did in game 1, although it wasn't really a total like freak outlier 3-point performance like the first 2 games were in this series, one for each team. I do have a slight lean to the Celtics still, just because things that I forgot to mention. I mentioned in the comments on my previous game, the Heat have actually not been a good home team this year. During the regular season, they were only, I think, 21-18 or 22-19 at home. That's not very good, not very impressive. They were not a dominant home team by any means. I think their record on the road was actually a little bit better than it was at home. And then the Heat, during the regular season, I believe as a home underdog, they were 0-10 straight up, 0-9 against the spread. And going back to last year, including the Celtics playoff series, that extended to, I believe, 1-12 against the spread as a home underdog for the Heat, including losing twice in that situation to the Celtics. I think the Heat might have been favored in one of those games against the Celtics, but they were a small underdog in the other 2. So I think, yeah, the Heat, I think, were favored probably in the game where they were trying to complete the sweep. I think is the one where they were probably favored, and they were the underdog in the other 2, something like that. But now the Celtics also were able to continue that trend in the previous game. So the Heat just have not been good as a home underdog, man. So I would still lean to the Celtics in this one. The Heat have now lost 11 straight games straight up as a home underdog and failed to cover in 10 of those 11 this season. And then going back to last year, they're whatever it is now, 1-13 against the spread in that role, with now 3 of those games being playoff games against the Celtics. So that's the situation that's going on there. You have Thunder Pelicans. This is a situation where the Pelicans are 3-0, trying to avoid the sweep. And of course, we see the line shift dramatically because those NBA teams that are in the 0-3 spot tend to be kind of a dead team. Thunder up from 3.5 to 4.5 now with juice. They have 85% of the cash on them, 53% of tickets on the other side on the New Orleans Pelicans, where it seems like the public is kind of coming in saying, oh, the Pelicans, total desperation mode, which is true. They're trying to avoid losing and being swept out of the playoffs. I just don't know if they have enough, man. The Pelicans, as I've been mentioning, they're not a very good home team, even worse than the Heat are at home. I think the Pelicans had I think they had the biggest road home discrepancy or dichotomy in the NBA this year. Maybe they were the better road team than the home team, which is just weird. I think they might have even been below 500 at home. I'm not even sure. Very close to 500. Thunder seemingly getting the money here, but you're not getting any value playing the Thunder either because the line has moved so much on them. I think they were like a 1.5 point favorite at New Orleans in the previous game, and now they're 4.5. You're not getting any value if you're coming in playing the Thunder here. But playing the Pelicans, who might just be a totally dead, flat team, now facing the 0-3 insurmountable deficit, which is why the line is up to this. I don't think I would want to do that either, so I just can't be on this one. I don't know if I should comment on any of these totals either. It does seem like, again, with these, like I mentioned it yesterday, with these series like the Celtics, Heat, and Thunder Pelicans that are kind of in the middle of the series there, like you kind of expect to see a little bit less intense defense perhaps, where teams just played like a couple days ago and the defenses are maybe not as well rested as they are in the earlier series games. So maybe potentially slightly less lower scoring games in those. Then we also have Lakers Nuggets, which is entering game 5, I believe, where we have the Nuggets avoided the sweep, similar to some of those, to one of those hockey series, or a couple of those hockey series, I guess, or one of them tonight, I think. Lakers Nuggets are back in Denver now. The Lakers avoided the sweep, winning game 4 to stay alive. Now they have to go back into elevation against a team they've only been able to beat one time in the last 12 tries, I think. Now, I think prior to game 4, they lost 11 straight to the Nuggets, although the Lakers did cover, I think, probably 5 of those games or something like that. And, of course, they covered and won outright in the most recent game. But I'm not sure that I like the Lakers in this one, though. I think maybe they just expended all their energy to get that win, and now a quick turnaround time, having to go back into elevation, which they're not as used to as the Nuggets, who, of course, play there. I'm not sure that the Lakers are really going to have that much left here. Lakers, of course, their 2 best players who account for like half of their scoring are LeBron and AD, and they're both pretty old, especially LeBron. So I'm not sure that I like any of that. Nuggets are down from 8 to 7 with juice here, but it looks like they also have 66% of the tickets, but 78% of the cash on them. So I do have the cash discrepancy on them. Very hard to gauge these games here, man. But maybe interesting anyway to watch what takes place in these 3 games. And I guess the slight lean would, I guess, be to Denver. And that was so the slight leans in the NBA, I guess, would be to the Celtics, the Thunder, even though they're laying way too many points, and the Nuggets laying 7 with juice, which I don't really love that idea either. But I do think that the Lakers are finally going to wind up falling. We move on to MLB. I actually have 3 plays in the MLB on a somewhat shorter Monday card. I kind of like the Monday cards, man, because you have teams that are switching series now. So a couple of the teams are actually continuing series, but you get a lot of new series starting where you get certain scheduling spots that are pretty good. Let's just get right into it, man. I'm going to be on the Kansas City Royals against Toronto, plus 126. You can just take the underdog money line on this. So it looks like the money is coming in on Kansas City. It looks like a pros versus Joes situation here with Toronto down from minus 150 to minus 140, 69% of the tickets on them, 77% of the cash on the other side on Kansas City. So it looks like a big ticket versus cash split there. Toronto yesterday was able to avoid the sweep for me. I had Toronto yesterday in the game against the Dodgers, a pretty big series against the Dodgers, and Toronto was able to avoid getting swept. But to do so, they did have to use 3 of their better relievers in the game to hold off LA in a 3-1 win and use their closer, I guess, Romano, to get the save yesterday. So Toronto is down a few of their best relievers in that one. And now they're coming off of that game. They are staying at home, but they might be like kind of sort of riding that high off of finally getting like a big win there. A nice win, which you might say that might start like some new winning momentum for them. But I don't know, man. When you're off a big win over a good team like the Dodgers like that, and now you have a Kansas City team who, even though they have a good record, I still think that people don't consider Kansas City to be that good. You have them coming into your house. Do you really totally focus on them? I'm not entirely sure about that, although Kansas City did just beat the Blue Jays 3 out of 4 games in a series 2 series ago. So I guess you could argue that, yeah, the Blue Jays will actually be focused on them potentially, although a lot of those games are close, man. So I don't know, but the Blue Jays might want to get a little bit of quick revenge against Kansas City, but those games were at home for Kansas City. Now Kansas City's coming into Toronto. Kansas City was in Detroit, so they're not really traveling that far either. So not a horrible travel spot for Kansas City. And they lost each of the last 2 games against Detroit, so they might be kind of in a bounce back spot where Toronto could be in a little bit of a letdown spot, even though they are going to potentially be looking for a little bit of revenge against Kansas City. Kansas City also used 3 relievers yesterday, but maybe not some of their better relievers or some of the best relievers because they were just losing that game late in the game to Detroit, so they didn't have to like try to hold them off. So I think Kansas City's bullpen situation might be in a little bit of a better spot. And then looking at the starting pitching matchup, this is where I think you get most of the rest of the edge here. Whereas even though the odds makers are telling you the team with the worst record, Toronto, is actually the better team because they are favored by a bit at home here. But you see the money coming in against them, man. And I think I can see why. I've talked about Yariel Rodriguez, the starter for Toronto, and how I like him. I think he's good. He's a Cuban-born player who was in the Japanese leagues, and he's been pitching. I mean, he was good in the Japanese leagues. I think he does have good stuff. In his first couple games in the majors, he did pretty well. just with that unfamiliarity aspect of it. But he has just not gone deep into games, man. And he seems to be trending in a bit of the wrong direction. He has not gone more than 4 innings in any start so far. So he's had a short leash. They aren't really unleashing him yet, and it hasn't really gotten better, really. His last start was actually the worst one out of the 3. He allowed 1 earned run in each of his first starts, had a good strikeout walk ratio on those. He does still have a good strikeout walk ratio on the season and good strikeout rate, 15.5 strikeout walk ratio and 11 2/3. So all that's pretty good, but he's allowed 5 runs, which isn't that great, on 2 home runs, though. 13 hits, also not great. And the amount of walks is too high, 5 walks for a 1.54 whip. That's not good. So he's actually getting away with putting guys on base, man. With a 3.86 ERA, his whip is actually indicating that his ERA should be a lot higher than it actually is. So he has not pitched well. And his most recent start was the worst one, where he only had 2 strikeouts, 2 walks in 4 innings, gave up 6 hits, 3 earned runs. And that was against these Kansas City Royals. And now he's facing them immediately again. So I think that that's a bad spot for the pitcher, because you get a pitcher who, yeah, he's unfamiliar to most of these teams in the majors, but not Kansas City, because Kansas City just faced him in his last start in that previous series. So now that actually turns into a negative for the starting pitcher, because Kansas City just saw him. So, like, it's almost like the best possible situation for an opposing lineup is to face a pitcher again that they just saw, because now they're used to him. That short-term memory is still there. Oh, we just saw this guy. And he didn't even do well in that game when Kansas City was totally unfamiliar with him. So, like, how well is he going to do in this one? I mean, now that I say that, maybe he'll actually do better. But his stats after that game against these Royals hitters are not good at all, man. They're 6 for 18 off him with 1 extra base hit, a double. It was only the 2.2 strikeout walk ratio, as I mentioned. That's a 333 batting average for these KC hitters off him. They had a 400 on base percentage and 789 OPS, which is somewhat high. So these Kansas City hitters, though, I think they're going to have a big advantage here, because they just saw this guy, Rodriguez. And, yeah, he just has not been going deep into games, man, which gives me some concern. And the fact that he had his worst start in that most recent start against Kansas City, none of that looks very good for Rodriguez. So you have the market indicators going against them. I think the situation, scheduling-wise, could be a bit against Toronto, just in the very recent terms as far as what these teams did in their most recent game. And then on Kansas City side, I think they also have the starting pitching advantage. They have Jonathan Bowlan starting. He is making only his 2nd start in the majors. He's made 2 appearances ever in the majors last year, 1 start. There's not much you can glean from that. They really didn't leave him in long in that start. He gave up 1 run. I think it was that start against Detroit. Only went 2 innings, gave up 1 run. There's really not much you can glean from that at all. Had a 2.0 strikeout walk ratio. Made a relief appearance against the Yankees that was scoreless as well. So I think he has a 3.0 strikeout walk ratio and a 3 ERA, I guess, on his career, because he's allowed 1 run in 3 innings on his career. Really not much you can gain from that. Now, Jonathan Bowlan, he is a prospect. I believe he was a 2nd-round draft pick way back in like 2019, but his debut in the majors got delayed because of an elbow injury, I believe. He wound up having Tommy John surgery in 2021. So he was still like trying to come up through the minors. He did have some bad years in the minors, some bad stats in the minors. So he was coming up through it, but then that injury really halted him, and he had to have Tommy John. But now it looks like he is bouncing back from that. And it looks like he's been pitching pretty well in the minors as of late, even though after he came out of Tommy John, he was having to readjust again, and his numbers weren't good either. So if you look at his numbers in the minors, they're all over the place, where he had some bad numbers and then some good numbers, but those good numbers seem to be the most recent numbers as well. He started really pitching pretty well, which is why he's gotten the call up here, which I believe is to replace Alec Marsh, who is now injured. So Bowlan is coming up, and there are things to like about Bowlan, man. I mean, he has the profile of a major league starter. He's a 6'6", 240-pound guy. So he is a big guy on the mound, kind of an intimidating presence on the mound, and he's going to have that built-in advantage in this game just because he hasn't been seen before. And I like to talk about that when you have a guy who's like a decent prospect who has decent stuff, profiles as a starter, has a bunch of different pitches. He has a 5-pitch arsenal, I believe, with I think 3 different fastballs, a 4-seam fastball that's like in the mid-90s, and then a couple of moving fastballs, a sinker, which was his primary pitch for a while. Now I guess he switched to using the 4-seam fastball as the primary, but he still has that sinker, and he has a cutter, I believe. So he has some fastballs that have some decent movement on them, and I guess he's developing a slider that has some pretty wild movement on it as well. And I don't even know what his 5th pitch is, but he's got some speed changes there and some hard stuff that moves. So that all looks pretty good. And when you have a pitcher that has a profile like that hasn't been seen before by the opposing hitters, man, the pitcher has like the early advantage in the game. And I think that's going to be the case with Bolin here. So I actually like him better than Rodriguez for all these reasons. I like going with these pitchers that are unfamiliar, that are like new to the league, man, that have good starting stuff. And I do think Rodriguez is one of those guys, but just as I mentioned, the way that he's been used so far, or hasn't been used to a degree where he's been going deep into games, and the fact that he just faced Kansas City, all of that is a disadvantage to Toronto and an advantage to Kansas City here. And the market seems totally in agreement with that. So Bolin, I like him a lot better. And I did watch some footage of him pitching in the minors as well. He has had a decent like whiff percentage as well since he started pitching better again. He's had some decent strikeout numbers, like a whiff percentage in like the mid 30% range, which is pretty good. So guys are swinging and missing on a lot of his stuff, which that's a good indicator to me as well. And even though I did say that about, I think it was Milwaukee's pitcher yesterday, he didn't actually do that bad. He had like a good strikeout walk ratio yesterday. Milwaukee's pitcher there, that new guy, Myers or whatever, Stroman actually had the worst pitching line yesterday for the Yankees. Stroman did not do very well. But the Brewers bullpen was just horrific. So yeah, Bolin, I like him a lot better in this one. I don't know if there's that much else to say about this, but I did watch some footage of him pitching in the minors, and he does have kind of an odd like start to his windup as well that gets like a little bit jerky, which could also maybe throw off like some hitters' timing maybe slightly, because it seems like he like gets into his windup and actually throws the pitch like a little bit like maybe slightly later than you would expect him to with the way that he's winding up. It's a little bit odd. So that's that game. And speaking of, those pitchers who are new to the league, so I've liked going on, Garrett Crochet is also pitching for the White Sox today, but I'm not going to get involved in that game, man. He's facing Joe Ryan, who has been very good against these White Sox hitters. Crochet has been going in the complete wrong direction. Has had 3 awful starts in a row. And just like Yarel Rodriguez, Crochet's most recent start was against these Twins hitters, and they kind of lit him up, and they just saw him. So that's going to be a disadvantage to Crochet in that one, so I really don't want to get involved in that one. Although I would actually probably lean to the Chicago White Sox, to the Minnesota Twins slightly in that one, but it looks like the market is very against that. The Twins look like they have the public sentiment in that one to quite an extent, and less of the cash, and they're a road favorite pretty significantly. So I'm not going to get involved in that one. The next game I'm going to be on is to play the Tampa Bay Rays against Milwaukee. Going against Milwaukee, even though they have looked like ass in the last couple of games, you can see the market indicators on this one look like they are against Milwaukee as well. Milwaukee is seeing reverse line movement, even though they are heavily public. They're down from minus 120 to minus 112, 93% of the tickets on them, but only 85% of the cash. So it looks like they have the heavy majority of the tickets and even the majority of the cash, although this indicates some of the bigger cashes coming in on the other side because it's more tickets than the amount of cash, and the numbers moving down on Milwaukee to the point where they're only a very small favorite. And the public might be coming in and looking at this and thinking, well, wait a minute, Milwaukee has a really good record, 17-10 against a 13-16 Rays team. Like, how could we not take this short price with the obviously better Brewers, right? Well, again, it's all about the matchup, man. And yeah, you might want to argue that Milwaukee's kind of in a bounce back spot because they've looked so unbelievably bad in that series against the Yankees. Over the last 2 games, they allowed 30 combined runs. But I just don't think it's going to get that much better for them in this game against the Rays, even though the Rays, of course, don't have anywhere near as good an offense as the Yankees. Sure, that's true. But I don't think that Milwaukee's just going to fix all their issues in a single game like this. They are still coming off a big series over the Yankees where they won 1 of the 3. And even though, yes, they did get blown out, and you could say that's embarrassing, but it is against the Yankees, who are one of the better teams in baseball. So is that really that embarrassing? I mean, giving up 15 runs, 2 straight games kind of is, but that also means that, I mean, this is baseball again, man. So like, it's not about like, oh, this team's going to immediately bounce back for an embarrassing performance. It depends on what the situation is. And in those 2 games, I think Milwaukee's bullpen kind of got wrecked. They got blasted in that game yesterday. Myers did go 5 innings, but then Milwaukee used 4 relievers in the game. So they've used quite a bit of their bullpen there, even though they didn't use like some of their absolute best relievers in that game. They still used like a bunch of their bullpen yesterday, and some of them got lit up. So their bullpen not really in the best situation here. Now they're staying at home, which I don't think is that good either when you're coming off bad games like that. I think it's better to like go out on the road so you don't have to listen to like what the local like radio's saying about you and about how much you suck. No, they're staying at home and having to like listen to that and hear that. Whereas I think this is going to be better for Tampa Bay because Tampa Bay, I mean, they're also in a bounce back spot. I mean, sure, Milwaukee just lost pretty badly to the Yankees, but it is the Yankees. Look at what Tampa Bay just did, dude. They just got swept by one of the teams that's one of the worst in baseball, the Chicago White Sox. Tampa Bay got swept by them and allowed 21 runs over 3 games to the White Sox and couldn't even get 1 game against them, which was on the road, but still, that's going to be embarrassing. And Tampa Bay only traveling from Chicago to Milwaukee. That's a very short trip, of course. So I think Tampa Bay is in a nice bounce back spot here after that. That was a terrible series for them. And in that most recent game, Tampa Bay, their bullpen was a lot less used than Milwaukee's was. So their bullpen's going to be less taxed. Zach Littell did decently in that game, went 6 innings, and then Tampa only had to pitch for 8 innings because the White Sox were winning the game going into the bottom of the 9th. So Tampa did not have to pitch up bottom of the 9th in that one. So they only used 2 relievers, and one of them was Rodriguez, so I think is kind of an inning eater. So they used him for 1 1/3 yesterday. So most of the best of their like bullpen is completely saved and like ready for this game. So Tampa's bullpen, I think, is in the better situation. And then looking at the starting pitching matchup, Milwaukee has Bryce Wilson. And I've mentioned him a couple of times. I am not a fan of Bryce Wilson, obviously. He pitched in that game against St. Louis where I think I had the over, and it wound up being a 12-5 game. Wilson only went 1 1/3 in that one. Bryce Wilson, man, I mean, he's a guy who was coming out of the bullpen for a while. Now he's having to make some starts, I think, to fill some void in Milwaukee's rotation. I don't think that's ever a great situation, even though he's still a young guy. He's been around since 2018. He's bounced back and forth between like being a reliever and being a starter. Last year, he was a reliever the entire season for Milwaukee last year, which is the year that he put up his best stats. But as a starter, his stats have been way worse. To the point where over his career, he has a 4.73 ERA, 1.37 whip. None of that is good. And he has a 3.5 ERA this year, which I think makes him look better than he actually is. He's a guy who's not going to go deep into games because he's having to make starts like on the fly like this. And then let's look at his stats against Tampa Bay. Yeah, I mean, those stats aren't really that bad. They're 2 for 10 off him lifetime, so they haven't seen him a whole lot. He only has 1 strikeout against him and 1 walk, though. So there's not much to glean, though, really, from a small sample size like that. But you can say that Tampa's hitters have seen him before, at least to some extent. So, and just the way that all the stuff that I just said about Wilson, the fact that he is really a relief pitcher right now and just isn't going deep into games as a starter, I think that's all bad for Wilson. So I much prefer Ryan Pepiot, who's the starter for Tampa, who is actually a legit starter, and it looks like his ERA is basically around the same as Bryce Wilson's. So people might think, oh, this is a wash. I don't think so at all, man. Pepiot, he's gotten into the 6th inning in every one of his games except one where he went 5 in that one. So he's gone at least 5 in every one of his starts. He's gone 6 innings in 3 out of the 5 of them. He's been good in his last 2 starts. He's gone 6 innings and allowed 1 earned run in each of them. So none of that is bad at all. He has a 31-10 strikeout walk ratio this year. The 10 walks is a little bit too high, but only 18 hits allowed and 31 strikeouts and 28 2/3. All that's good. Those are good stats this year, man, for a .98 whip. So I like all that. He's got a good whip. He is keeping batters off of the base pass for the most part, with the fact that he's been quite unhittable. And Milwaukee's hitters have barely seen him before, man. So that's also where I think you get a little bit of an edge here. Only 2 of their hitters have ever seen him before. And yeah, they're 2 for 4 off him with 2 home runs. So none of that looks good at all. And he has no strikeouts against him. So it's a very small sample size, though. So I don't know if there's that much to glean from that. And I think versus the rest of their lineup, he may have a bit of an edge just because they haven't seen him before. He's been pitching a lot better recently. He's had 2 bad starts on the year, but one of them was that first start on the season against a good Texas lineup, and he still had a 4.1 strikeout walk ratio on that one. So I don't think you can really, that doesn't indicate much. And it's also a first start. We can kind of give a guy a pass for that. And then he did have one other start that wasn't great against San Francisco where he gave up 4 runs, but he had a 6.1 strikeout walk ratio in that one too. In his other 3 starts, 3 out of the 5, he's allowed only 2 earned runs combined across those 3. 1 earned run in 2 of those, and then 0 in the game against Colorado, which is the second start. So I think we're getting the much better pitcher here in Pepiot as well. So for all those reasons, Tampa, you can get them at plus 100. And then we'll finish this off with a play on the Pittsburgh Pirates. Got to go fast here. The market on this one looks like it's against me, with Pittsburgh being a minus 130 road favorite. 64% of the tickets on them, but 82% of the cash on the other side on Oakland. I don't understand the cash discrepancy being on Oakland here, man, even though, yeah, you're getting them as a home underdog price here, but Oakland is returning home from a 3-series road trip that took them to Cleveland and then out to the East Coast to the Yankees and Baltimore. Now they're having to come back from the East Coast with no days off, and those are tough games against series against the Yankees and Baltimore, man. Like some of the better teams in the AL East, and they split the series with the Yankees and then won the series 2-1 against the Orioles, winning yesterday 7-6, and now they're returning home, having to go from east to west, which is one of the worst things that you could really have to do, and having to play a night game at 9:40 p.m. So again, that messes with your biological clock, man, because you're going to be playing like basically past midnight in the time that you're now adjusted to, the time that you're used to. So none of that is good. And they played a tough game against Baltimore yesterday where they used 4 of their relievers, including some of the back end of their bullpen to finish that game off against Baltimore, which is also a big win. So they could be in a letdown spot there. Their bullpen is a bit used. Pittsburgh, on the other hand, they're starting a series after they lost to the Giants, so they're already adjusted to the West Coast time, man. They already had that bad game. In that game that I was on against the Giants, they didn't even play that badly in that game, where they had that first game where they had to adjust to the West Coast time at San Francisco. Wound up losing that game, so now they've already played a series out in the Bay Area already, so their travel is actually way less. Even though they're on the road, they're already in San Francisco, and they're just going up to Oakland. Pittsburgh's in the much better travel spot, and they're already adjusted to the West Coast time now, having been out there for multiple days now, having that series, and they lost that series to the Giants, losing yesterday. So I think they might actually be focused here, even though it's a series against a pretty bad Oakland team. They might be looking to bounce back, whereas Oakland's coming off a big win. Pittsburgh's coming off a losing series to a below 500 team, and now they're below 500. Which might be a little bit of extra motivation for them too, because they might not want to let that stand. Pittsburgh also pretty much saved their bullpen yesterday after Jared Jones went 5 innings. He didn't do horribly in that game. I won on the under, and now he gave up 2 home runs, which really skewed his numbers. He's got to keep that ball in the park, man, because other than the home runs, he's really keeping those runs limited. Pittsburgh then used Ortiz to eat up 2 innings, and they were able to finish off that game only using 2 of their relievers and basically keeping their better relievers intact, whereas Oakland basically had to use theirs. So all of this is bad. And not only just the having to adjust time zones, but Oakland's returning home from a 3-series road trip, man. So they've been on the road for forever. And now they're crossing the country with no time off, and they're going to have to deal with those like return home distractions that come into play. When you return home, you have to deal with like family life right away. So you may not be totally focused on that first game back, that first team back. So all of that is bad for Oakland. And Oakland has Joe Boyle pitching, and sure, he's never been seen before by Pittsburgh. So I might argue that, well, that gives him an advantage, and he is a young guy. But I'm just looking at his stats on his career. Not good, man. Not very good. Mostly this year he's been awful. Last year he had 3 starts, and he actually did pretty well. This year, really, really not much. Not so much at all. So over his career, he has a 4.78 ERA, 1.38 whip. That's not good. This year, 7.06 ERA and 1.8 whip. There's not much to like at all about what he's done this year, man. He's been awful. 21 and 2/3 innings pitched. He's allowed 23 hits, 17 earned runs, and 16 walks. That's insane. He's almost putting like 2 men on base an inning, and he has 24 strikeouts, which is fine, but 16 walks is absolutely absurd. On top of the amount of hits he's been giving up, he's just been really giving it up in every way imaginable. So I don't think that that's just going to be fixed right away. So I don't like Boyle, man, even though he hasn't been seen before by Pittsburgh. That just doesn't look good. Whereas then on the other side, you got Bailey Falter is pitching for Pittsburgh, and he has been much better this year with a 3.33 ERA and 0.89 whip, so that looks a lot better. Oakland has almost never seen him before either. They're 2 for 3 off him lifetime, sure, but like I said with the other pitcher that I was talking about, I don't even remember who I was talking about, Pepio maybe. It's such a small sample size. I don't think you can really take away much from that. Only 3 at bats. So that means most of the hitters on Oakland have never seen Falter before. He's been much better. And in his last couple of starts, I mean, since his first start, which was a brutal start against Miami, where he allowed 6 earned runs, since then he hasn't allowed more than 2 earned runs in any start. He's gone at least 5 in all those starts. He's allowed 0, 1, and 1 earned run in the other starts, besides the start where he allowed 2 runs against the Mets, who have a decent offense. He shut out Baltimore, gave up 1 run against Philly and 1 run against Milwaukee. So these are not exactly horrible offenses he's facing either. And on the season, it amounts to an 18-7 strikeout walk ratio in 27 innings. So it's not great as far as the strikeout rate, but the number of walks isn't terrible. And 17 hits, that's quite good as well. He's been very difficult to hit, and he's given up 4 home runs too, which he's got to keep that down. But the fact that you've given up 4 home runs, you should be allowing more runs than that. But he's been allowing so few base runners that his numbers have been pretty good. He allowed 2 of those home runs in that first game against that bad Miami offense too. So other than that game, which I think you can kind of just throw out, he's been really quite good. And he has a 16-4 strikeout walk ratio in 23 innings other than that. So I like Falter a lot more, and that's going to do it for me, man. We got Kansas City Royals plus 126, Tampa Bay Rays plus 100, and Pittsburgh Pirates -1. Have a good day. Peace.